Alright, we're looking at the engine here, and we are going to look at the Raycor fuel filter, which is right here. So I haven't opened any of this up before, so I want to open it up, take a look at it, see what it looks like. What this is supposed to be for, the electronic pump is supposed to be for bleeding the engine, I guess. But you have to turn the engine on, or you have to just turn the key on in order to get this to come on. But I don't think it's hard to tell if this works because I've tried to turn it on and feel if it's running, but I can't really tell. So I'm going to open this up and see if we can figure out what the problem is with this. So in order to get this, it's relatively easy to change this. This little T handle here comes open like that, and the handle comes all the way out like that. And the next thing is the lid. So there's the lid. Now what should happen here, we should be seeing fuel in here, but I don't see any fuel, which tells me that the fuel level is probably too low. So in order to get this pump out, there's these little lift things there, and they're difficult to get by hand, so I'm going to grab them with this little thing. There we go. And then that comes up like that. So overall, I mean, the pump looks, or the filter looks good. It's not bad at all. It's just the level is not good. This level should be much higher. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put that back on there for now. And probably doesn't need changed right now. But now I need to see how to get this thing to come on. So first thing we need to do is turn on the ignition. So I'm going to have my wife turn the ignition on, and then I'm going to turn the pump, which is right down on this side, or over here by my feet right now. Can you go ahead and turn the key on? So key is on, and nothing is happening with the switch. The pump doesn't feel like it's on. So I'm going to guess that maybe the pump doesn't work. You can go ahead and turn that key off, please. So it looks like the pump doesn't work. Now I guess the next step would be to see if this is getting power, if the pump is getting power here, which I could do by, if I go into the wires go through this bulkhead here, and they go into the back side over there. So I can open that up, and there's a couple wire nuts in there, I think. So that'll probably be the next step, and do that. Here's another problem, or I'll say potential problem, is we're back here behind where the fuel pump is, and I just disconnected there's two wire nuts on there. I don't think you're supposed to have wire nuts on a boat. It should be some sort of other clamp type fitting. So I took that one wire nut off. There's some corrosion on the wire itself. So what I'm going to do, and I tried to get voltage out of it, and it only got like 1 or 2 volts. So there is voltage going there, but it is not enough to turn the pump on, is my guess. So what I'm going to try to do is clean that up a little bit and see if that helps get any more voltage. Otherwise, I'll trace that back and then see where the next connection is and see if we can clean that up as well. Another problem, it looks like that doesn't look like the right kind of wire for a boat. It looks like regular house wire, actually. It's not tinned. It's stranded, but I think it should be tinned. This other one here is, so that one is correct. But this one here, this is the one that goes to the switch. So the switch is not, the wiring looks like regular house wiring. Alright, so now I'm getting 12 volts out of it. So I think it just is a matter of that connection was bad. So I'm going to go ahead and put these wire nuts back on temporarily to see if I can get it to work. And if it works, then I will change those wire nuts out with some regular connectors. Okay, so what I'm getting is 12 volts without the pump connected and like 1 volt with the pump connected. So maybe it's actually a problem with the pump is going to be my next guess, because it is giving it 12 volts until it's connected to the pump. So I've got the old fuel pump out, and I've taken one of the fittings off, getting ready to put on the new one. This one is the exact same one. It's no longer made by Purelator. It's made by, I guess, Facet, and which is a Purelator company, I think. So I took this fitting off. I'm going to need to put the fittings back on there. And this one was put on with Teflon tape, which you are not supposed to put on fuel lines, because Teflon tape, little bits of it can get broken up and go through the fuel pump and into the engine and cause all kinds of clogs and stuff. So I have, instead of using Teflon tape, you're supposed to use something like this. This is Permatex Forma gasket. It's a thread sealer. So that's what I'm going to do with this one, is coat the threads here with the sealer. Put this back on. Take that one off and put that one back on. And then that will be ready to go back into the area of the engine, which is right, if it's not focused on my finger, right about there. And that's going to go in there as soon as I get those fittings back on there with the correct thread sealer on there. All right, the new fuel pump is in there, and this is where it's at. And I'm not 100% sure that it's working exactly the way it's supposed to work. And I've got another issue that has popped up, as is the case with boat work. But what's happening is I replaced this. So I replaced this starting with the switch. So I put a toggle switch in right there. It had a push-pull switch that I took out and replaced it with the toggle, just because the push-pull switch is just, maybe it's a better switch. I don't know. But I like the toggle better. I don't like the push-pull. So now the pump comes on, because I think the switch was part of it before. I replaced all the wire with tinned marine wire, which was regular wire before. I replaced the wire nuts with the proper connectors. And I cleaned up the fittings, took off the Teflon tape, and put proper gasket sealant on there. So what's supposed to happen is that when that pump comes on, it's supposed to fill this Raycor filter, and then from there the fuel goes into the secondary filter, which is over on that side of the engine, which I'll talk about in a second. And what's happening is I flip the pump on and it doesn't sound like it's not pulling the fuel. My suspicion is that this is in the wrong spot. This should actually be closer to the fuel tank. In fact, the installation manual for this said it needs to be no more than 12 inches above the bottom of the fuel tank. So I'm going to guess we're probably above that right now, where this is at. So it's probably not getting enough fuel or prime or something to pump it, but it does come on. And when I look inside here, open up the Raycor, the level never rises. So I fire the engine up, and the level never changes in the Raycor. So I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong as far as bleeding it. But anyway, so going back to bleeding it, I come over here to the other side. And right here, this thing right there, that is the main filter, I guess. Maybe you call it the primary filter or whatever. But this is the last filter before it gets to the engine. And this is a bleed screw right here. I'm not sure if you can see it right there. That's a bleed screw right there. So what has happened is when I went to bleed it, we got air in the lines, I opened it up and there was no gasket. There's supposed to be a copper gasket on there, and there was no copper gasket. So I put a copper gasket on, and when I tightened it back up, it didn't feel right. It felt loose, like the threads were starting to strip. And of course, this piece here is aluminum, and that's a stainless steel bolt. So what ended up happening is those threads ended up fully stripping, so it doesn't even tighten up at all. So that's a problem. I have to replace this, and it's not that big of a deal. It's got two bolts that hold it on, and then the fuel inlet and outlet, and that's about it. So that's the next thing I have to replace, and once I get that, I can get a better sense of what's happening back in the back with that new fuel pump. All right, we're back on the boat, and I ordered the new fuel strainer assembly right here. And the way this works is there's a fuel filter inside here, and this is where the fuel goes in from the Raycor filter, and this is where the fuel goes out into the engine. This thing right here is the bleed screw, and that is the offending part. And if we undo this, you can see there's a little copper washer that goes on that. The screw, the bolt that goes in there is stainless steel. It's got a hole through the middle and through the top, so you can bleed this strainer assembly with it. So this has to be replaced, and it is on the engine, which I'll show you here in a few seconds. And that is our project for today. So right here is where that goes. The fuel strainer goes right down in that little spot there. It's kind of hard to get to. It's not super bad. It's only got a couple bolts holding it to the engine block, and it has a couple of fittings that take the input and the output for the fuel. So all those things have to come off there, and then the new one's going to go on. Fending part is removed, and it's got diesel in it. I'm going to save that diesel because I want to put it in the Raycor to fill that up. So let's do that now. All right, so here, this is the part that has the problem. This is the bleed screw, and if we look at the bleed screw, it's kind of hard to twist out of there. Last time I took it out of there, it came up with a whole bunch of aluminum on the threads. You can look in there and see the threads are all messed up. So that is the problem. So now it's time to swap the other piece, put the other piece on there. Let's go ahead and do that. So this is how it works. This is like if you ever change the fuel filters, this is how you do that. And there's the new filter in there. There's the chamber. There's a little O-ring on the top of that right there. And that's, of course, is a new filter. So we'll leave that in there. And then we'll tighten this up. It doesn't have to be super tight because it's got that rubber gasket. But when you get these off, when it's on the engine, it's harder to hard to get off because you can't get a wrench in there if you needed to. But if you just take a screwdriver and tap the little indentations, you can pop it right off there. I'm gonna make sure I get that, and I'll tighten it up once I get it back in the engine. All right, I think that's good. Okay, so next step is to bleed this. And that is a whole other story. Alright, it turns out it's not a whole other story, and the bleeding worked perfectly. So I just flipped this, I just tried it to see if it would work, and it worked perfectly. So what happened is I flipped the switch, and I used the manual lift pump here. There's a little thumb lever on it that you push down, and it's supposed to help you bleed the engine, but it takes forever because you're pumping a little bit at a time. So I went ahead and did that a couple times with the electric pump on, and then it must have primed the electric pump enough that it just kicked on and just pumped all the air out of this, and now it appears that it looks good. So this fuel strainer piece has been filled. So I'm going to go ahead and let that soak into the filter for a second, and then I'm going to go ahead and do that again just to make sure we get all the air out of the system. Again, and there we go. It's spraying out just fuel. So that's perfect. Way better than I anticipated. And I'm covered in diesel fuel. And hopefully that solves all our problems. All right, so engine is running.
and has been bled. The first time I tried to start it up and to bleed it, and I noticed it was leaking fuel, and it turns out it was leaking from the banjo fitting coming out of the lift pump. So that I went ahead and I twisted on the bolt that holds that in. It was a little loose, so I just went ahead and took it apart, replaced the copper gaskets on that, tightened it back up, and the leak is gone. At first I thought maybe it was coming from the hose, which would have meant having to replace that hose, but it just turns out it was just a loose bolt on the fitting. So that has been fixed. Lines are bled, engine's running perfectly, the new electric pump's working perfectly, everything is working perfectly. All right, we are out in the Annapolis Harbor area, Severn River. We got the engine bled and everything looks good, so we're going to give it a shot, make sure that the engine works okay, and then throw up the sails. The wind's very light today, so I may also try to put the spinnaker up if I can. So as you can see out there, it kind of looks, it's a little bit crowded going out, not too bad. So we're gonna go out here straight ahead for a little ways and maybe try to see if we can get the spinnaker up. Chesapeake Bay, and we're not going to put the spinnaker up because the winds are a little too strong. So right now it looks like they're averaging like around 10 knots or so, 10, 11 knots. So that's really too much for the spinnaker, especially for the first time putting it up. So we're going to skip that today, sail a little bit longer out here, and head on back, fire the motor up again, make sure that that works. And scratch that, the winds died down once we got out into the bay to about 5 knots or less. So we went ahead and threw the spinnaker up, as you can see, and it seemed to work okay. A little tricky getting it up to begin with, but once we got it up, it seemed to work fine. So next time we'll try with a little bit more time on our hands, and hopefully we have some light winds and we can try to fly it again. We're done sailing for today, and we're off to our favorite after sailing stop, Forward Brewing, right across from our marina in Eastport. The best beer and the best food in Annapolis. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Until next time, see you later.